Buona nuit. I just wanted to talk real quick about the postmodern condition by Lyotard. Mainly because I didn't find any text that was like, I'm not gonna say, I just didn't see anything that was fully covering the whole thing, and I'm not gonna fully cover the whole thing either. Mainly because I didn't really study this text. I read it cover to cover, but within a day. So I'm just gonna try to offer a clearer perspective that is not so biased. The postmodern condition is just one of those many texts that you will have come across that try to diagnose the state of society. I say state and not stage, for example, because it's very important to. This is not historical. Postmodernity doesn't come after modernity; it comes after and before. It is it precedes modernity insofar as it's a precondition for modernity. Because postmodernity, said simply and quickly, says Lyotard, is incredulity towards meta-narratives. What are meta-narratives? Meta-narratives are grand narratives that legitimize discourse, and frameworks that organize it and justify its existence. Science, progress, Marxism, systems in general are part of these frameworks, and their universal aims have a lack because they are not self-contained. They are all sort of mutually referential. So science is justified in the scientific method, but the scientific method is a philosophical claim, not a scientific one. You cannot prove the scientific method doing science. You have to argue for using the scientific method, for example. Thus, it is referring to philosophy or referring to rhetoric, which is not a science. If you're playing chess, referring to McIntyre's After Virtue, when he's talking about practices, he says there is internal and external goods, right? And he says, no worries, I'm gonna save you all. Internal goods are better because they are the ones that allow the narrative to exist, the game to exist. And here we're also gonna be talking about games as well. But yeah, so external games, external goods, within the game you have external and internal goods. External goods are money. I'm playing chess, I wanna get money, and I get money, and now I play chess. That's an external good. Skill is an internal good. He argues that skill is way better than money, and in that you would want to have a society that focuses on its internal goods rather than external ones. The problem with this is that it also is not self-contained. It's not a self-contained framework. It's still fragmented. It doesn't really go beyond itself to encompass the whole of society. And if it did, it would still be leaving things out. That's the main critique that Lyotard makes to all meta-narratives, that they always leave things out. If you don't want me to play chess, if you want me to cheat playing chess, you will tell me that I will become better, and that is good because I will be more noble or honest or something if I'm not cheating when I play chess. That is not chess. That is not chess. When you're saying that I will become more noble, you're referring to a moral framework. Similar science was sustained in the idea of progress. Lyotard wrote Heidegger and the Jews, a much more complex text that, if you find this one interesting, which is very short and extremely easy to read, I thought this is the reason why I'm recommending this book, because I think it's the easiest I've read from Lyotard, the easiest I've read in terms of philosophy this year so far, and Heidegger and the Jews might be the most difficult I've read this year so far. But what you get in Heidegger and the Jews, and also in Adorno's Minimum Moralia and Negative Dialectics, is that idea that the idea of progress was completely, it collapsed in the Second World War, because science was seen as going in hand in science, truth, progress. They were seen as going in hand together. But what progress is science bringing, when science is what allows for the atomic bomb to exist, when progress is the progress towards that, when mechanical developments allow for greater wars with greater death and more brutality, when science genuinely, like literally, permitted the possibility of the existence of gas chambers at all. Scientific progress does not go in hand with like philosophical progress, at least, and that is a progress that we really refer to. We don't want just scientific progress that goes on and on by itself without a society that progresses with it, because that means that all it's doing is potentiating the damage that a retrograde society can cause, which is largely what's happening in a huge part of the world. That's science is being used to do all sorts of horrible stuff. But so that's where he's coming from. Postmodernity, as I said, is incredulity towards those meta-narratives. It's not that Lyotard is arguing for like fighting the meta-narratives, being against them, so much as it's like you should not be for meta-narratives, but you should also be against the fragmentation of society. So somewhere in between. Why? Because referring to the other books I was talking about now, there's like I think it's this one that talks about the unrepresentable or Heidegger and the Jews. I don't remember right now. So either Lyotard's Heidegger and the Jews or Theodor Adorno Negative Dialectics. I would probably read this one first and then read Heidegger and the Jews. But it's because they are like non-identifiable differences. There is a framework called Occident. There is a framework called the West, and that is a huge I, a huge us that that judges everything. Is the I by which all frameworks are shaped, right? What is not contained in any meta-narrative, in the idea of truth, which is the one that sustains everything else, and the one that Nietzsche questions as well in his genealogy, with talking about the devaluation of all values, because that's partially what we are talking about here as well, is the unrepresentable, the non-identical, the unrepresentable differences, minorities, the Jews, and I say Jews like this because I'm referring to the Jews of Heidegger and the Jews, which is not an ethnical category or a religious category. It's referring to all of those unrepresentable differences, all of those non-identifiable identities, all of those dissident, the dissidence itself from the norm that has not yet been identified by the norm as dissidence. It has not yet been labeled. When you get a system, you have to always leave something out, and there is an argument to be made that is positive. Goethe would say that, to grow, one has to limit himself. You cannot build a house if you keep forever expanding the foundations. You will always expand horizontally, but you will not grow. But the problem with this, and Lyotard is not arguing, therefore, against building those foundations, but the problem is not arguing against limiting those foundations. But the problem is that in the moment you do that, you are leaving stuff out. I don't see a clear solution to this given by Lyotard, but definitely he sees the incredulity as something needed. Maybe not what drives a society, but it is there. It is both in modernism and postmodernism, and postmodernism just rejects to try to sort of build back or repair the meta narratives. I am omitting the critiques to Habermas. Also, there's an amazing preface from Frederick Jameson that I might talk about on the concept on the context of aesthetics at some point. But I just want to talk about those themes that one doesn't need to have read anything else for understanding. So yeah, I think that's it. Another interesting topic that is treated here is because this text has a certain premonitory or prophetic aspect, in the sense that he was talking about the internet and about the mechanization of society and about how through the digital platforms knowledge was being turned into information, and information was being disowned by everyone and was gonna be disowned by everyone. The context of this text is it's pre social media, it's pre many of it's 1984, I think. 1984. So it's, to a degree, this was not so obvious back then, but right now you can see that in the internet all information is equal. The devaluation of values that Nietzsche talked about is very much, especially the value of truth, is pretty much equated to that of lying. Even if one sort of like travels through the internet in search for a specific value or asset that he or she finds a preference for or is emphasizing, there is no status or ownership of any of that. What do I mean by this is that before, sort of like, the government would have a monopoly over this. Now it's more for the multinationals to not so much have a monopoly over it, but exploit its flow. So rather than knowledge itself, which is not owned by anyone, now there is just a continuous flow and a manipulation of how and where that flow goes. Knowledge, it's only information, and information is just a product. It's just a product from which multinationals can profit. So it's not just that there is a decay on the meta-narratives and a complete collapse of any universal truth, and that all the meta-narratives have to refer to each other in order to sustain themselves, but by doing that they are fragmented because all of them won't have pretensions of universality. But also that the very value that goes across all of them, truth itself, has also been devalued. So yeah, I think that pretty much summarizes the whole thing. When I say meta-narratives, you have to think of frameworks that justifies the narratives of discourse. And and that would be it. I could talk on and on. I could talk about the sublime and the beautiful and the difference, and how realism once sees art. Obviously, this is in the context of Lyotard. I don't agree with some of his arguments, but I'm just trying to sort of like give the like a rough idea of what this book is about. How like he goes on to talk into how the realism evades the question of reality. It doesn't evade the question of reality. It believes that reality is self-evident, and therefore it moves on to other questions that considers more important. I do think, like, I mean, I don't know if I am a realist, but I am definitely, I find it probably plausible to say that there is something such as reality, and that it can be known, and that it is independent from us, which I think are the main claims of realism. But I haven't yet dove into that specific part of philosophy, so I will tell you when I find out. But yeah, I think I'm just gonna read the end of the book, and I'll leave on that note. But yeah, ultimately, Lyotard argues that what modernity and postmodernity have different is the reaction. The reaction to what Lyotard will call the sublime that of that which is like unrepresentable. Modernity recognizes the sublime, that there is like some infinitude that it cannot represent, something that exceeds our capacities to provide questions to and to legitimately represent it. But still it tries to rescue it. For postmodernity, that is a lost cause. There is no allusion to that. In fact, postmodernity focuses on that fragmentation, and it tries to supply or invade illusions to the conceivable, which cannot be presented. So that is the idea of postmodernity that Lyotard sort of presents here, diagnoses to a degree, and that goes all across this text. I have omitted a lot. I should have written a script or something, but that is the main thing. I'm just gonna read the last paragraph. Finally, it must be clear that it is our business not to supply reality, but to invent allusions to the conceivable which cannot be presented. There you have what I just said. And it is not to be expected that this task will effect the last reconciliation between language games, which under the name of faculties can't new to be separated by chasm, and that only transcendental illusion, that of Hegel, can hope to totalize them into a real unity. But Kant also knew that the price to pay for such an illusion is terror. The 19th century and the 20th century have given us such a terror as much terror as we can take. We have paid a high enough price for the nostalgia of the whole and the one, for the reconciliation of the concept and the sensible, of the transparent and the communicable experience. Under the general demand of the slackening and of the appeasement, we can hear the mutterings of the desire for a return of terror, for the realization of the fantasy to seize reality. The answer is, let us wage a war on totality. Let us be witnesses to the unrepresentable. Let us activate the differences and save the honor of the name. I think that's a very condensed sort of note of part of the main claim that was on the appendix, the last paragraph. But I think also the appendix can be read by itself, and it's definitely a very interesting text, especially keeping in mind that when someone wants to read something about postmodernism, normally you have to go for hundreds and hundreds of pages, like with Frederick Jameson. But in this case, the appendix is only 10 pages, so I totally recommend it if anyone wants to explore modernity and postmodernity. And I don't know if I said it, but for further reading, I also recommend The History of Sexuality by Michel Foucault and The Culture Industry by Theodor Adorno. All of those texts sort of like speak to each other and use similar concepts, so by the end, someone should already have a clear idea of what we are talking about here. Thank you.